Okay, we made it to episode 13 of Vinland Saga. Spoiler alert, of course. First, to address the opening to my son. This episode is the new opening, not the last episode. I know you would ask me about that. I much prefer so far the previous opening. It's a lot more emotional. This opening is cool. It's more exciting, which I guess goes with the flow of what's going on in the first season, especially now that it's kind of getting going with the plot, with what's going on. It just makes more sense. But I do prefer the first opening. I like the first opening a lot better. I love the emotional music from the first opening. But this is about halfway through the first season, I believe. I think it's 24 episodes or so. This is the 13th episode, so it makes sense they change it. And I understand the change thematically. Anyway, having said all that, now what we're doing at the end of episode 12, Askeladd's group, his 100 men, were trapped. Now, again, they're marching through Wales. Wales is full of a bunch of different kingdoms. The leader of one kingdom has agreed to help them pass all the way through Wales and make agreements with other kings along the way. They meet this one king, and this king has archers surrounding him, and he threatens them, even though he had agreed to give them passage. They had sent a letter ahead, and there was an agreement that they would get passage, but this king is threatening them. He goes and speaks to the king. They're shocked that Askeladd speaks their language, of course. And his men wait, and the other men wait as Askeladd speaks to this Welsh king, along with the other king that's helping him pass through, or the leader of the other kingdom that's helping him pass through. He goes and speaks to him and tries to negotiate, letting him through. Basically, this is just a big bluff. He doesn't want to look this king doesn't want to look bad, just allowing them to pass through. They don't want their king to look bad. So they end up coming to an agreement where they basically make it look like they're taking them prisoner as they walk through their kingdom, as they march through the kingdom. During this meeting they're having, a few things happen. First of all, Askeladd's second in command talks to one of his men about how he's shocked that Askeladd speaks this language, because he's Danish. All these guys are Danish. They're Danish mercenaries working for the Danish king, King Sweyn. He's a Danish king, trying to learn these names, and still don't have the prince's name. I thought I had it. Anyway, we'll talk about the prince in a second. So they're mercenaries and they're Danish. So how does he know this language? Comes to find out, Askeladd is half Welsh. And part of his whole plan, his whole concocted plan, and we all know he's a brilliant tactician and a brilliant leader, and we find out a little bit of why that is, and I'll talk about that in a second. But his whole plan in capturing the prince is not so much about money, but about power. This prince is going to be the next king. And if he is trusted by this prince, he will be able to get this prince to sign, the Danish prince who's trying to take over England, to sign a non-aggression pact with the Welsh. And that'll keep them from ever invading Wales, and keep the lands of his ancestors safe. I think it was his mother who was Welsh. One of the reasons he's a great leader, if you believe in bloodlines, which this show does, and why he also has so much respect for Thorfinn, with his dad being Thor, is a great leader, was his ancestor. He's the last ancestor of this great leader from Wales, who is actually the inspiration for King Arthur. No, it's right, King Arthur. I think that's what they said. Yeah, for the King Arthur legend. So this guy was insane. He has this guy's blood in his veins. It tells you a lot about why he's a good tactician, good warrior, good strategist. So, and also why he appreciates the fact that Thorfinn has a warrior's blood in his veins that he respects. So again, more depth into Askeladd. The prince. So they start marching again through this land. They actually have to give up all of their weapons. Interestingly enough, of course, Thorfinn is like, no chance. I think he calls him an old man, an old geezer. He's like, I'm not giving up my weapons to you, forget that. And so he lets him keep his. And then Ragnar, I believe, the prince's handler doesn't want to give up his sword. So he's basically like, okay, you two keep yours. Everybody else can give up theirs. Nobody will notice. So Ragnar has this huge sword, and of course Thorfinn has his two small swords that he dices people up with. Anyway, they go marching along, and Thorfinn starts to kind of challenge the prince. He's like, why don't you talk? There was a scene earlier, I apologize. There was a scene earlier where Askeladd tried to get the prince to say something to the men, and he wouldn't. So as they're marching again, Thorfinn needles him and needles him, keeps calling him princess. It's like, is your little pretty mouth broken, or something he says to him, And then the prince actually starts talking, and he gives this really, even Thorfinn is like, that's a reasonable explanation for why you don't talk. He was saying that, look, I'm the prince. My words carry weight. I've got to be careful what I say. I don't have my father's permission to sign treaties or anything. We're in a foreign land. I've got to be careful. I'm trying to be cautious with my words. So Thorfinn's like, you know what? That makes sense. That actually makes sense, And then he says something else to him, and the prince starts yelling at him. It's hilarious, actually. And Thorfinn's just basically, he's literally like sitting here like this, not even looking at him, like, And the prince is yelling and screaming and pointing at him, and Thorfinn's just completely ignoring him. The thing is, it shocks everybody, including Ragnar. Ragnar's like, oh my God, he's talking to somebody else besides me. And all the people kind of stop. Everybody freezes like, oh my God, the prince is talking. We've never actually even heard him speak or say anything. So they continue to march through this land. Snow falls, and they have to change routes. And this is where, we'll find out more about the next episode. They have to go into enemy territory, or because snow is falling, Askeladd decides they need to go into enemy territory. So they change directions. The men are kind of confused, but they do what he says because, they obey Askeladd. Without question, he's a great leader. And they just do what he says because, like one of the guys said earlier in the episode, it's like, well, if he keeps making me rich, I don't care. I'll do whatever he wants me to. So the episode ends with them taking that detour. This episode was really almost utilitarian. It was like it needed to happen just to march the plot forward. Episode 12 ended with them being threatened, and it ended up not being anything at all. There wasn't a lot of meat to this episode, not a lot of scenes. You got to see the prince talk, but whatever. It's not a lot to this episode. This wasn't one of the groundbreaking episodes. I'm still wanting to see the next episode, obviously. And this does move the plot forward. You find out more about Askeladd and his background. That was interesting, especially the whole, being the ancestor of a great leader. Because the episode actually starts with a flashback of Askeladd carrying his mother onto a beach. You don't know it's Askeladd at the time, but he's like, my mother's dying. She wants to come back home and die. And then you find out later that the young man carrying his mom on his back is actually Askeladd. So you start to get a little bit more depth into his character. That's probably the most significant part of this episode. And of course, Askeladd is, I know he's not technically Thorfinn is the main character of this show, at least I think so. But, Askeladd's the man. One more thing before I go. This episode's long, or this review is long, but Askeladd was trying to get the prince to talk again. I gotta say, when the prince would refuse to talk, I thought Askeladd was going to kill Ragnar. I was waiting for it because I felt like he thought, and they actually allude to this, I felt like he thought this prince is never going to have a backbone with Ragnar protecting them, and they allude to that later. That this prince needs to get away from Ragnar to have some backbone. So I'm looking to see what's going to happen with that, whether he's going to take Ragnar out or how he's going to pry him away from the prince, or if that's already been done with Thorfinn kind of egging the prince on and getting him to actually open up and come out of his shell a little bit. But we'll see what happens. On to episode 14, Friday.